I still remember the sound of the rain hitting the front porch the night everything fell apart. I was 7 months pregnant. One hand rested on my swollen belly while the other held a small grocery bag filled with baby clothes I'd bought from a thrift store. They weren't expensive, but they were clean, soft, and perfect for the little girl growing inside me. I smiled all the way home. I thought my husband Daniel would smile too. Instead, I opened the front door and heard shouting. Not normal arguing, screaming. His mother, Margaret, was waiting in the living room with her arms crossed. I told you this girl would ruin our family. Daniel stood beside her, silent, looking at the floor. The smile disappeared from my face. And what happened? I asked. Margaret walked toward me. I've had enough of your laziness. Laziness? I work 40 hours a week. I clean this house. I'm carrying your son's child. She laughed. My son deserves better. Daniel still said nothing. I looked directly at him. Daniel? He finally lifted his head. Maybe Mom's right. My heart stopped. What? This marriage isn't working. I honestly thought he was joking. Then Margaret grabbed one of my suitcases. She had already packed my clothes, every drawer, every shelf, everything I owned. She threw the suitcase onto the porch. You need to leave. I stared at Daniel. Tell me this isn't happening. He rubbed his forehead. I think maybe we need some space. Space? I'm 7 months pregnant. No answer. Just silence. The kind of silence that changes your life forever. 20 minutes later, I stood outside in the pouring rain. Pregnant. 2 suitcases, $83 in my purse. No parents, no siblings, no home. The front door slammed shut behind me. I remember placing both hands over my stomach. I'm sorry, baby, I whispered. I don't know where we're going. I spent that night sleeping in my old Honda Civic. It was February. The heater barely worked. Every kick from my daughter reminded me she depended entirely on me. Around 3 a.m, I cried so hard I could barely breathe. Not because I had lost my husband, because I realized he had watched his own pregnant wife become homeless and never once walked outside to check if I was alive. That hurt more than anything. The next morning, I called every shelter within 50 miles. Most were full. One finally had a single bed available. When the receptionist asked whether I was escaping domestic abuse, I hesitated. Daniel had never hit me. But emotional abandonment, humiliation, being thrown onto the street while pregnant, maybe abuse wasn't always bruises. Sometimes it was silence. The shelter wasn't glamorous. 4 women shared one room. The mattress squeaked. The walls were thin. The food was simple. But for the first time in 24 hours, I felt safe. A volunteer named Angela handed me a warm blanket. You're going to be okay. I smiled politely. I didn't believe her. Not yet. 3 weeks later, my daughter arrived 6 weeks early. She weighed only 4 pounds. Tiny, fragile, perfect. The nurses placed her in my arms. At that exact moment, every ounce of fear disappeared. I'll protect you, I whispered. No matter what. Daniel never came to the hospital. His mother never called, not even once. It was as if we'd never existed. 3 months later, the divorce papers arrived. No apology. No explanation. Just signatures. Daniel requested shared custody, not because he wanted to be a father. His lawyer admitted the truth during mediation. If he has partial custody, child support payments will be lower. I looked at Daniel across the conference table. This was the man I had loved for 6 years. I didn't recognize him anymore. I signed the papers, walked out, and promised myself one thing. I would never let my daughter grow up believing that this was what love looked like. What I didn't know was that the worst chapter of my life was secretly becoming the beginning of something extraordinary. The first few months after Emma was born felt like surviving one storm after another. Every morning, I woke up wondering how I was going to make it through the day. The shelter only allowed residents to stay for 90 days. After that, you were expected to figure life out on your own. Life didn't care that I had a premature baby. Bills still came. Diapers still needed buying. Formula wasn't free. And every night, after Emma finally fell asleep, I sat beside her tiny crib wondering whether I'd failed before she'd even had a chance at life. One afternoon, while Emma slept in her stroller, I walked into a local grocery store looking for the cheapest diapers on the shelf. I counted every dollar in my wallet. $32.17. That had to last until Friday. I stood in the diaper aisle doing math in my head when someone tapped my shoulder. You look exhausted. I turned around. A woman in her 60s smiled kindly. Her silver hair was tied back neatly. She wore the blue vest of a volunteer from the community center. I'm Helen. I forced a smile. I'm okay. She looked down at Emma. Beautiful little girl. What's her name? Emma. Helen reached into her shopping cart and quietly placed a large box of diapers beside mine. You forgot these. I can't afford. They're already paid for. No, I can't accept. Helen interrupted me. Then do something for someone else when you're able. That simple sentence stayed with me for years. Helen became more than a stranger. She became family. She helped me apply for government assistance. She introduced me to a daycare program for single mothers. She even convinced me to enroll in evening classes to refresh my office in computer skills. You've survived something many people never could, she told me. Now it's time to build. For the first time, someone believed in me. Meanwhile, life at Daniel's house was exactly as Margaret had planned, or so she thought. Without me around, Margaret finally had her son all to herself. She chose his meals. She washed his clothes. She even rearranged the furniture because, according to her, my house should finally look respectable. Daniel barely argued anymore. At first he enjoyed the peace. No crying, no disagreements, no responsibilities, just him and his mother. But peace has a strange way of revealing the truth. Without me handling the bills, the laundry, the grocery shopping, the appointments, the birthdays, the little things that kept a home running, Daniel slowly realized how much I had actually done. Still, his pride wouldn't let him admit it. 3 months after the divorce, Margaret invited another woman to dinner. Her name is Vanessa. She's from a respectable family. Unlike your ex-wife. Daniel sighed. Mom, you deserve someone better. Vanessa smiled politely throughout dinner. But when Margaret criticized the restaurant's food, then complained about the waitress, and then interrupted every conversation, Vanessa quietly finished her meal. She never called Daniel again. Margaret blamed her. She wasn't good enough. Daniel said nothing. Deep down, he knew the problem hadn't been Vanessa. Back in my tiny apartment, life was improving one small step at a time. It wasn't glamorous. The apartment was barely 500 square feet. The kitchen sink leaked. The heater made strange noises. The bedroom was so small that Emma's crib nearly touched my bed. But every bill was paid by me. Every piece of furniture had been earned. Every smile inside those walls was real. I had something I'd never had in Daniel's house. Peace. When Emma turned 1, she took her first steps. She stumbled across the living room, straight into my arms. I laughed so hard that I cried. There was nobody else there to witness it. No grandparents, no father, just us. And somehow, that made the moment even more precious. One evening, while cleaning the apartment, I received a phone call from an unfamiliar number. Hello. Is this Sarah? Yes. This is Attorney Collins. My stomach tightened. Daniel. What did he want now? I represent your former husband. I closed my eyes. Go ahead. There seems to have been a mistake regarding the child support agreement. A mistake? Mr. Parker believes the amount is too high. I almost laughed. The amount barely covered Emma's daycare. He's requesting a reduction. I looked across the room. Emma sat on the floor, happily stacking colorful plastic blocks. She had no idea that the man who helped bring her into the world was arguing over a few $100s. I took a deep breath. Tell Mr. Parker, I paused, that every dollar he spends on his daughter is still less than what she deserved from her father. Silence. Then the lawyer quietly replied, I'll pass along your message.
2 weeks later. The court denied Daniel's request. The judge increased his child support instead. Why? Because Daniel had recently received a promotion at work. He had tried to hide his new salary. The judge wasn't impressed. When Daniel walked out of the courthouse, Margaret was waiting outside. This is all her fault. Daniel stared at the courthouse doors. For the first time, a small thought entered his mind. Maybe, just maybe, throwing his pregnant wife out into the rain had been the biggest mistake of his life. But by then, I had already stopped waiting for him to realize it. That night, after putting Emma to bed, I opened my old laptop. I updated my resume, applied for 12 office jobs, and whispered to myself, they took away my home. They will never take away my future. I had no idea one email waiting in my inbox the next morning would change everything forever. The next morning, my alarm rang at exactly 5:30 a.m. Emma was still asleep. I quietly made myself a cup of instant coffee, opened my old laptop, and checked my email. Mostly rejection letters. Thank you for your application. We have decided to move forward with another candidate. I had gotten used to reading those words. Then one email caught my attention. Subject: second interview invitation. Hawthorne Financial Group. I blinked twice. I didn't even remember applying there. Curious, I opened the message. Dear Sarah Mitchell, after reviewing your qualifications and speaking with our hiring team, we'd like to invite you for a final interview tomorrow at 10 a.m. Tomorrow? My heart raced. I looked around my tiny apartment. I had exactly one professional outfit, a navy blue blazer I'd bought 7 years earlier for my college graduation. I prayed it still fit. That evening, Helen came over to watch Emma while I prepared. You look nervous, she said. I am. What if I'm not good enough? Helen smiled. Sarah, 5 years from now, you won't remember being nervous. You'll only remember whether you walked through that door. The next morning, I arrived 30 minutes early. The Hawthorne Financial Building towered over downtown. Glass walls, marble floors. Employees hurried through the lobby carrying laptops and coffee cups. I suddenly felt out of place. My shoes were polished, but old. My handbag had been repaired twice, and my blazer, well, fashion had definitely changed in 7 years. I almost turned around. Then I remembered Emma. Every decision I made wasn't just for me anymore. It was for her. I took a deep breath and walked inside. The receptionist smiled. You must be Sarah. Yes. They're expecting you. As I waited, I noticed another applicant sitting across from me. Expensive watch, designer suit, confident smile. He looked like someone who belonged here. I looked like someone trying to survive. A few minutes later, a tall man in his 50s stepped into the lobby. Sarah Mitchell? I stood. I'm Richard Bennett. The CEO. CEO? I wasn't expecting that. He shook my hand firmly. Come with me. Instead of taking me to a conference room, he led me to a quiet office overlooking the city. He offered me coffee, then surprised me with his first question. Tell me about the hardest thing you've ever overcome. I had rehearsed answers about spreadsheets, office software, customer service. Not this. For a moment, I considered giving the polished version. Then I decided to tell the truth. I was abandoned while 7 months pregnant. I lived in a shelter. I raised my daughter alone. I worked nights. I studied whenever she slept. I never stopped believing I could build a better life. The room became silent. Mr. Bennett didn't interrupt once. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair. Do you know why I asked that question? I shook my head. I can teach someone software. I can teach accounting. I can't teach resilience. The interview lasted nearly 2 hours. We talked about organization, problem solving, time management, leadership. When it ended, Mr. Bennett stood up. I'll contact you by Friday. I smiled politely. Experience had taught me what that usually meant. Another rejection. 3 days passed. Then 4. Friday came. Nothing. By Saturday afternoon, I had convinced myself they had chosen someone else. That evening, while helping Emma color pictures at the kitchen table, my phone rang. Unknown number. Hello? Sarah? Yes? This is Richard Bennett. My heart skipped. I have good news. I held my breath. We'd like to offer you the position. For a second, I couldn't speak. The salary is $68,000 a year. I almost dropped the phone. That was more money than I'd earned in the previous 3 years combined. There are also health benefits, retirement contributions, paid vacation. But there's one condition. My stomach tightened. We expect excellence. A tear rolled down my cheek. You'll have it. Monday became my first day. Everything felt different. A security badge with my name. A real office. A computer that wasn't 15 years old. Co-workers who welcomed me. For the first time since Emma was born, I felt like my life was moving forward instead of simply surviving. Over the next 2 years, I worked harder than anyone. I arrived before sunrise. I volunteered for difficult projects. I stayed late when deadlines approached. Not because anyone forced me, because every opportunity felt like a gift. Slowly, people nodes. 1 promotion became 2, then 3. By the time Emma turned 4, I had become operations manager. The same people who once overlooked me, now asking for my advice. Meanwhile, Daniel's life was heading in the opposite direction. 5 years. That's how long it had been since I last saw Daniel. 5 years since the rain. 5 years since I stood on that porch with 2 suitcases, my unborn daughter, and a broken heart. During those years, I had imagined this moment more times than I could count. Would I cry? Would I scream? Would I ask him why? Now that it was finally about to happen, I felt nothing. Monday morning began like every other. I arrived at Hawthorne Financial just before 7. My assistant, Mia, handed me a tablet. Good morning, Sarah. Morning. You've got a full schedule today. She scrolled through the calendar. 9 o'clock budget review, 10:30 executive meeting, 1 o'clock lunch with the regional director, 3 o'clock meeting with Parker Logistics. I paused. What company? Parker Logistics. The name sounded familiar. I frowned. Who's representing them? Mia checked her notes. Daniel Parker. Everything around me suddenly became very quiet. The air felt heavier. For a brief moment, I was back on that rainy porch. Then I took a slow breath. Keep the meeting. Are you sure? I nodded. Business is business. Across town, Daniel adjusted his tie for the 3rd time. His company wasn't doing well. A major client had pulled out. Revenue was falling. If they didn't secure Hawthorne Financial's contract, layoffs were almost guaranteed. His manager had made that painfully clear. Don't lose this account. We can't afford another failure. Daniel had spent the entire weekend preparing. PowerPoint slides, financial projections, cost-saving strategies. He had no idea who he would be presenting to. At exactly 3 o'clock, the conference room doors opened. Daniel walked in carrying his laptop. He smiled professionally. Then he looked up. The smile disappeared. At the head of the table sat me. Not the frightened woman he remembered. Not the exhausted single mother. But the operations director of one of the city's fastest-growing financial companies. I stood calmly. Good afternoon, Mr. Parker. His face turned pale. Sarah. I extended my hand. Welcome. He hesitated, then slowly shook it. My handshake was steady. His wasn't. The room filled with silence. Neither of us mentioned the past. There were 6 other executives in the room. To them, we were simply 2 professionals meeting for the first time. I gestured toward the presentation screen. Please begin. Daniel cleared his throat. His voice shook during the first few slides. He stumbled over numbers, forgot a key statistic, apologized twice. This wasn't the confident man I'd once married. Pressure had changed him. Halfway through the presentation, one of our finance managers interrupted. Your proposal estimates a 10% reduction in operating costs. Can you explain how those savings are achieved? Daniel searched through his notes. His hands trembled. He couldn't find the page. I quietly slid the printed report toward him. It's page 26. He looked at me in surprise. For a second, I saw guilt flash across his face. He continued. The meeting moved forward, professional, respectful, exactly as it should. An hour later, the presentation ended. Our executives thanked him. Everyone began leaving the room. Soon, only Daniel and I remained. Neither of us spoke. Finally, he broke the silence. You've done well. I smiled politely. So have you. He looked around the empty conference room. I didn't expect... He stopped. Didn't expect what? You. I nodded. Life surprises us sometimes. He lowered his eyes. I've wanted to apologize for years. I remained quiet. I was weak. I should have protected you. I should have protected our daughter. The words hung in the air. 5 years ago, those words would have meant everything. Today, they felt strangely small. I looked directly at him. Do you know what hurt the most? He shook his head. It wasn't being thrown out. It wasn't sleeping in my car. It wasn't the shelter. His eyes filled with regret. The worst part was realizing that the one person who promised to stand beside me stood beside someone else. Daniel covered his face with one hand. I'm sorry. Real tears rolled down his cheeks. I know, I answered quietly, but an apology doesn't change history. Before he could respond, my phone buzzed. The screen lit up with a picture of Emma, 7 years old now, smiling with 2 missing front teeth. I answered immediately. Hi, sweetheart. Mom! I got an A on my science project. I laughed. I knew you would. When are you coming home? About an hour. I made you a picture. I can't wait to see it. I love you. I love you more. I ended the call. Daniel had heard every word. Our daughter? He asked softly. I nodding. She's amazing. Can I?
His voice cracked. Can I see her sometime? I looked at him for a long moment, then answered honestly. That decision won't be mine alone. It will be hers. Daniel slowly nodded. I understand. He picked up his laptop bag, walked toward the door, then stopped. Without turning around, he asked, Does she know who I am? I looked out the conference room window toward the city below. She knows she has a father. She also knows that heroes are measured by what they do, not by what they promise. Daniel closed his eyes. Every word hit harder than any accusation, because they were true. That evening, Daniel returned home in silence. Margaret was waiting in the kitchen. How did the meeting go? He placed his briefcase on the floor. I saw Sarah. Margaret rolled her eyes. So? She's the operations director. Margaret laughed dismissively. Impossible. It's true. She was leading the meeting. For the first time in years, Margaret looked genuinely worried. What do you mean she was leading it? Daniel stared out the window. Mom, I think we underestimated her. Margaret folded her arms. She's still nothing without our family. Daniel slowly turned toward her. No, he said quietly. She's everything. Without us. For the first time, Margaret had no reply, but she still believed she could never need Sarah again. She was about to discover how wrong she was. The collapse begins. Original fictional story inspired by family drama. For the next few weeks, I didn't think about Daniel. Not because I'd forgotten him, but because my life had finally become too full to leave room for the past. Every morning started the same way. Emma would race into my bedroom before sunrise. Mom, pancakes? I laughed. On a Tuesday? She grinned. Tuesday pancakes taste better. I pretended to think about it. I suppose the chef can make an exception. She wrapped her little arms around my waist. Moments like that reminded me why I had fought so hard. Not for revenge, not to prove anyone wrong, but so my daughter would never have to wonder if she was safe. Work was busier than ever. Hawthorne Financial had expanded into 3 new states, and I had been asked to oversee the integration of 2 newly acquired companies. One Monday morning, Richard Bennett called me into his office. Close the door, Sarah. His serious expression made me nervous. Is something wrong? He smiled. Quite the opposite. He handed me a folder. Inside was an employment contract. What is this? I've recommended you for Vice President of Operations. I stared at the paper. Vice President? I've only been here 5 years. Richard leaned back in his chair. And in those 5 years, you've solved problems that others couldn't solve in 20. I've watched you lead. I've watched you mentor people. And I've watched you stay humble. He smiled. Titles don't make leaders. Character does. For a moment, I couldn't speak. The woman who had once counted coins for diapers was now being offered one of the highest leadership positions in the company. That evening, Emma and I celebrated with pizza on the living room floor. She insisted on making a tiny toast using 2 glasses of apple juice. To Mommy, I laughed. To us. She clinked her glass against mine. No, she smiled proudly. To Team Mitchell. I felt tears forming. Children have a way of saying the simplest things and making them unforgettable across town. Daniel's life was unraveling. Parker Logistics had officially lost the Hawthorne contract, not because of personal feelings. Our procurement committee had selected another company with lower costs and better performance metrics. The decision had been unanimous. I had deliberately removed myself from the final vote to avoid any conflict of interest. But the outcome was the same. Without that contract, Parker Logistics was in serious trouble. Monday morning, employees gathered in the warehouse. Whispers filled the building. Then the CEO walked onto a small platform. I'm sorry. Those 2 words told everyone everything. The company is restructuring. 35% of our workforce will be laid off. Gasps spread through the crowd. Some people cried. Others stared silently at the floor. Daniel stood near the back. He already knew. Managers had been informed the previous evening. He was one of the people losing his job. After 12 years, he carried a cardboard box out of the building. Inside were family photos, a coffee mug, a few office supplies, his career, reduced to a single box. When Daniel arrived home, Margaret was sitting in the kitchen. You're early. He placed the box on the table. I lost my job. Margaret frowned. Well, you'll find another one. It isn't that easy. Nonsense. You're talented. Daniel laughed bitterly. Talent isn't the problem. Margaret ignored him. Instead, she began criticizing the company. The management was incompetent. The economy is terrible. The government is useless. Everything and everyone was to blame, except herself. A week later, another problem appeared. Margaret collapsed while shopping at the grocery store. A customer immediately called 911. Doctors later diagnosed her with severe heart disease. She needed surgery. Soon. Fortunately, insurance would cover a large portion of the procedure, but there were still substantial out-of-pocket costs, along with medications and months of follow-up care. Daniel sat beside her hospital bed. For the first time in his life, he looked frightened. Margaret reached for his hand. "We'll be okay." He wanted to believe her, but he had no income. Savings were disappearing fast, and job interviews were going nowhere. Over the next month, Daniel submitted more than 80 applications. Some companies never replied. Others chose younger candidates. A few offered salaries so low that he couldn't even cover the mortgage. Bills piled up. Credit card balances grew. Collection notices began arriving. The pressure became unbearable. One rainy evening, Daniel walked into the garage looking for old paperwork. He opened a dusty storage box. Inside, he found a small photo album. The first picture showed our wedding day. I was laughing. He was smiling. We looked happy. He turned another page. There was a photo from our first apartment, another from our honeymoon, then an ultrasound picture, the first image of Emma. Taped beneath it was a handwritten note. "Can't wait to meet our little miracle. Love, Dad." Daniel sat down on the cold concrete floor. His hands trembled. He had written those words. He barely remembered doing it. He stared at the picture for a long time. Then, for the first time since our divorce, he cried without trying to stop. Not because he'd lost his job, not because of the bills, but because he finally understood something. He hadn't just abandoned a marriage. He had abandoned years of birthdays, bedtime stories, school plays, first steps, first words, first hugs, moments that would never come back. Meanwhile, life in our home was peaceful. Emma was now in 2nd grade. One Friday afternoon, she climbed into the car carrying a colorful drawing. "Look what I made." It showed our little family, just the two of us, me and her. Above the picture, she'd written in careful, slightly crooked letters, "My mom is my hero." I smiled. "It's beautiful." She looked at me thoughtfully. "Mom?" "Yes?" "Do heroes ever get tired?" I laughed softly. "Every day." "Then why don't they quit?" I reached over and squeezed her hand. "Because someone they love is counting on them." Emma nodded as if that answer explained everything. Maybe it did. That same night, someone sat alone in a dark kitchen, staring at unpaid bills spread across the table. The house that once echoed with certainty now felt unbearably quiet. Daniel looked toward the hallway where his mother slept after returning from the hospital. He knew the truth. He couldn't keep the house. He couldn't pay for everything much longer. And he had run out of people to ask for help. There was only one name left in his mind, a name he had spent 5 years trying not to think about: Sarah. He picked up his phone. His thumb hovered over my contact. Then he put it back down. Some mistakes were too big for a phone call. If he wanted forgiveness, he would have to face me, in person. He had no idea that the hardest knock of his life would soon be on my front door. Saturday mornings were sacred in our house. No alarms, no business meetings, no emails, just me and Emma. She insisted on making breakfast together, even though her version of helping usually meant covering the kitchen in flour. That morning was no different. "Mom," she giggled, holding a whisk twice the size of her hand. "I think I accidentally made a snowstorm." Flour dust floated through the air. I laughed. I think the kitchen agrees. For a little while, Life felt wonderfully ordinary, the kind of ordinary I had once believed I'd never have. After breakfast, Emma carried her pancakes to the living room to watch cartoons. I began washing dishes. Then, the doorbell rang. Once, twice. 3 slow chimes. I dried my hands on a towel and walked toward the front door. I wasn't expecting anyone. Looking through the peephole, my heart stopped. Standing on my porch were Daniel and Margaret for a brief second. The world disappeared. I wasn't looking at 2 strangers. I was looking at the people who had once watched me leave, with nothing but 2 suitcases and an unborn child. The same woman who had shouted, "Get out of my house." The same man who had stood silently beside her. Only now, they looked different. Daniel's suit was wrinkled, his shoulders were slumped, his hair had begun to gray around the temples. Margaret leaned heavily on a cane. The confident woman who once controlled every room she entered now looked frail. Time had changed all of us. I opened the door. No one spoke. The silence stretched for several seconds. Finally, Daniel cleared his throat. "Hi, Sarah." His voice sounded almost unfamiliar. "Hello, Daniel." Margaret avoided my eyes. That alone surprised me. Years ago, she had never looked away from anyone. "Can we talk?" Daniel asked quietly. I looked past them toward the driveway. Their old luxury SUV was gone. Instead, a faded compact sedan sat at the curb. I didn't invite them in immediately. Not because I wanted revenge, but because this was my home. My safe place. The place I had built from nothing. I wasn't going to let anyone disturb that peace without a reason. "What is this about?" Daniel glanced at his mother, then back at me. "We need your help." 3 simple words. Words I had once dreamed of hearing. Yet now, they didn't bring satisfaction. Only sadness. Before I could answer, Emma skipped into the hallway. "Mom, who's at the—" She stopped. Her eyes moved from me, to Daniel, to Margaret. She whispered, "Are they your friends?" I smiled gently. "No, sweetheart. They're people I knew a long time ago." Daniel looked at Emma as if the air had been knocked out of his lungs. She had my eyes, my smile, but she also had his dark hair. There was no denying it. He stared silently, realizing this was the first time he had ever truly seen his own daughter. Emma waved politely. "Hi." Daniel managed a weak smile. "Hi." His voice broke. "You've grown so much." Emma looked confused. "We've never met before." The words weren't cruel. They were innocent. But they hit Daniel harder than any insult could have. Because she was right. He had missed 7 birthdays, 7 Christmas mornings, 7 first days of school, 7 years. That no apology could ever return. I turned toward Emma. "Sweetheart, would you mind finishing your cartoon upstairs?" She nodded. "Okay." As she walked away, she looked back once more. "Bye." Daniel quietly whispered, "Bye." The door closed behind her. I faced them again. "You have 5 minutes." Daniel nodded gratefully. Margaret remained silent. Finally, Daniel spoke. "I lost my job." "I know." His eyes widened. "You know, the business community is smaller than people think." He nodded slowly. "My mother's surgery," he glanced toward her, "left us with more expenses than we expected." Margaret looked down at the porch floor, still unable to meet my eyes. "We're behind on the mortgage. We've sold almost everything valuable. I've applied everywhere. No one is hiring." He swallowed hard. I didn't know where else to go. For a long moment, no one said anything. The wind rustled the trees lining the street. Somewhere nearby, children laughed as they rode bicycles. Life continued, as if this moment wasn't rewriting old history. Finally, Margaret spoke. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "I owe you an apology." I looked at her carefully. She continued, "I blamed you for everything. I thought no woman would ever be good enough for my son. I believed I was protecting him. She paused. I wasn't. I was destroying him. A tear rolled down her cheek. I destroyed our family. Those words surprised even Daniel. He slowly turned toward his mother. Perhaps it was the first genuine apology she had ever given anyone. I listened quietly, then asked the only question that mattered. Why now? Neither of them answered immediately. Finally, Daniel admitted the truth. Because we've run out of options. I appreciated his honesty. At least he wasn't pretending this visit was about reconciliation. It was about survival. I folded my arms. Daniel, when I needed help, I was carrying your child. I slept in my car. I stood in the rain. You closed the door. He lowered his head. I know. When Emma was born, you weren't there. I know. When she took her first steps, you weren't there. I know. When she cried because other children had fathers at school events, you weren't there. Daniel covered his face with both hands. Every sentence landed like another weight on his shoulders. I know. His voice cracked. I know. Margaret suddenly stepped forward. I'll sell the house. Daniel looked at her in surprise. What? The house. It's too big. It's full of memories we don't deserve. She looked directly at me. For years I told myself I had won. I thought getting rid of you made our family stronger. Instead, she glanced at Daniel. I lost my son. She wiped away another tear. And I lost the chance to know my granddaughter. I took a slow breath. For the first time in years, I saw something I had never expected. Not arrogance, not excuses, not blame. Just two broken people. But being broken didn't erase what they had done. I can't pretend the past didn't happen, I said. Daniel nodded. I understand. But, I continued, I also won't become the person you were. Both of them looked up. I won't celebrate your suffering. I won't humiliate you. Because that's not the example I want my daughter to follow. Daniel's eyes filled with tears again. So, he whispered, what happens now? I looked toward the living room where Emma's laughter echoed through the house, then back at them. I'll help. Both of them stared at me in disbelief. But not the way you think? Daniel looked confused. What do you mean? I won't give you money. Their faces fell. But, I continued, our company has an opening. Daniel blinked. A logistics operations manager. It's an honest job. You'll start from the middle, not the top. You'll earn every promotion. No special treatment. No favors. If you're hired, it'll be because you deserve it. Daniel couldn't speak. After several seconds, he whispered, why would you do that for me? I smiled sadly. Because my daughter deserves to grow up believing that kindness is stronger than bitterness. Just then, Emma ran back downstairs holding another drawing. Mom. She stopped when she saw Daniel still standing there. She walked over and handed me the picture. It showed two people holding hands beneath a bright yellow sun. At the top, she'd written, being kind makes you strong. Daniel looked at the drawing, then at me. It was as if fate itself had answered his question, as Daniel and Margaret walked back toward their old car. Neither of them noticed the woman standing across the street, a neighbor who had watched everything from her front window. She smiled to herself. Years earlier, she had seen a pregnant woman leave the same street in tears. Today, she had watched that same woman stand on her own porch, not as a victim, but as someone who had become stronger than the people who tried to break her. Sometimes, the greatest victory isn't making your enemies suffer. It's refusing to let them change who you are. Monday morning arrived faster than I expected. I stood in front of my office window, looking out over the city. The conversation from Saturday kept replaying in my mind. Daniel's tired face, Margaret's apology, Emma's drawing. I had offered him an opportunity, not because he was my ex-husband, but because everyone deserves the chance to earn a living. There was one thing, however, I would never compromise. My daughter. That afternoon, I walked into Richard Bennett's office. He looked up from his laptop. "Morning, Sarah. I need your advice." He gestured toward the chair across from him. "What happened?" I told him everything. The divorce, the pregnancy, the years apart, Daniel losing his job, his visit to my house. Richard listened quietly. When I finished, he folded his hands. "So, you want to know if hiring him is a mistake?" I nodded. Richard smiled thoughtfully. It depends." "On what?" "Can you separate business from emotion?" "I believe I can." "And can he?" That question stayed with me. The hiring committee interviewed Daniel 3 days later. I wasn't there. By my own request, I refused to be involved in the decision. If he got the job, it had to be because he earned it, not because of guilt, not because of our history. After a 90-minute interview, the committee reached its decision. Daniel was hired, not as a director, not as an executive, but as an operations coordinator, a position with a modest salary and room to grow. He accepted immediately. His first day felt strangely familiar. 5 years earlier, I had walked through those same doors feeling terrified. Now, he was the one sitting nervously in the lobby. Employees hurried past him. Nobody knew his story. To them, he was just another new hire. For the first time in years, he wasn't someone's manager. He wasn't someone's husband. He wasn't Margaret's son. He was simply Daniel. And perhaps that was exactly where he needed to begin. Meanwhile, life at home remained wonderfully busy. Emma had discovered soccer. Every Tuesday and Thursday evening, I sat on metal bleachers cheering louder than any other parent. "Go, Emma." She laughed every time she heard my voice. One afternoon after practice, she climbed into the car, unusually quiet. "Everything okay?" She stared out the window. "Mom, can I ask you something?" "Always." She hesitated. "The man who came to our house," my hands tightened slightly on the steering wheel. "Yes?" Was he my dad? There it was, the question I had known would come someday. I pulled into a nearby park instead of driving home. We sat on a bench overlooking the playground. Children laughed as they chased each other. I looked at Emma. She deserved the truth, not the angry version, not the painful version, just the truth. "Yes, he is your father." She looked down at her shoes. "Why doesn't he live with us?" I took a deep breath. Sometimes adults make decisions they later regret. Did he stop loving me? The question pierced my heart. I gently took her hands. "Emma, a parent can make terrible mistakes. But those mistakes are never the child's fault. You didn't do anything wrong. Nothing." She looked into my eyes. "Then why didn't he come?" I felt tears forming. "Because he wasn't brave enough." Emma stayed quiet. Then she asked the hardest question of all. "Does he want to know me now?" I answered honestly. "I think he does." She nodded slowly. "I need time." I smiled softly. "You can have all the time you need." Across town, Daniel's first week at Hawthorne wasn't easy. Some employees recognized him from the meeting months earlier. Others didn't. He worked hard, asked questions, stayed late, never complained. One evening, as he was leaving the office, Richard Bennett stepped into the elevator beside him. "Settling in?" "I'm trying." Richard smiled. "You know why Sarah wasn't involved in hiring you?" Daniel nodded. "To avoid favoritism." Richard shook his head. Partly. He paused. But mostly because she wanted your future to belong to you. Daniel looked surprised. She said if you succeeded, it should be because you earned it. The elevator doors open. Richard stepped out, then turned back. Don't waste the opportunity she gave you. Weeks turned into months. Daniel slowly rebuilt his confidence. His supervisors praised his work ethic. He never asked for special treatment. He never mentioned Sarah, and Sarah never mentioned him. At work, they were simply colleagues in different departments, professional, respectful, nothing more. One Friday evening, Daniel received an unexpected text. Unknown number. This is Sarah. His heart raced. Another message appeared. Emma has agreed to meet you. He stared at the screen. His hands trembled. Then another message. Only if you agree to 3 conditions. He immediately replied. Anything. Her response came a minute later. Condition 1. You don't try to buy her love. Condition 2. You never speak negatively about anyone, including me. Condition 3. If she ever says she's uncomfortable, the visit ends immediately. Daniel read the message 3 times, then typed only 2 words. I agree. Saturday morning. He arrived 30 minutes early. Not because he wanted to impress anyone, because he was afraid of being late. He wore a simple blue sweater. No expensive watch, no designer clothes, just a small gift bag. Inside, a children's science kit. He remembered Sarah mentioning that Emma loved science. No jewelry, no expensive electronics, just something they could build together. If she wanted to. When the front door opened, Daniel's heart nearly stopped. Emma stood there beside me. She looked up at him. He looked back. Neither knew what to say. Finally, Emma spoke. Hi. Daniel smiled gently. Hi, Emma. She noticed the gift bag. Is that for me? He nodded. It is. She smiled politely. Thank you. Then she said something that made everyone smile. My mom says opening presents isn't the best part. Daniel looked confused. Oh. She grinned. The best part is seeing if the person wants to play with you afterward. For the first time in years, Daniel laughed. A real laugh. Not forced, not polite. Real. Maybe, just maybe. This wasn't the beginning of fixing the past, because the past couldn't be fixed. Maybe it was simply the beginning of building something new. As the 3 of us walked toward the backyard, Margaret watched quietly from inside Daniel's parked car across the street. She had chosen not to come. Not yet, she told him. I haven't earned that. She wiped a tear from her eye as she watched her granddaughter laugh. For the first time, she understood something she had never understood before. Family isn't something you control. It's something you protect. And she'd learned that lesson. Almost too late. The first meeting between Daniel and Emma lasted exactly 43 minutes. Not because anyone set a timer, because that was all Emma was comfortable with. When it was time to leave, she looked at Daniel and smiled politely. Thank you for the science kit. He smiled back. Thank you for spending time with me. She thought for a moment. Maybe next time. We can build the volcano. Daniel's face lit up. I'd like that. As he walked toward his car, I noticed something different. He wasn't trying to rush the relationship. He wasn't making promises. He wasn't asking for forgiveness. For the first time, he was simply showing up. Sometimes, that matters more than words. Over the next month, the visits became a routine. One Saturday, they built a model volcano. The next, they flew a small kite in the park. Another weekend, they visited the science museum. Always together. Always with clear boundaries. Emma slowly stopped calling him the man. Then she started saying, Daniel. She wasn't ready for Dad. Neither of us pushed her. Trust isn't built by asking for it. It's built by earning it. Meanwhile, Margaret stayed away. Not because she didn't want to meet Emma, because she believed she hadn't earned the right. She spent most of her days volunteering at a local food pantry. The woman who once judged people for needing help now handed groceries to struggling families. Life has an interesting way of teaching humility. One Thursday evening, as I returned home from work, an elderly woman was waiting near my mailbox. She smiled warmly. "Sarah?" "Yes?" "I'm Evelyn. I used to live across the street from Daniel's old house." It took me a second to remember. Mrs. Evelyn Carter, the neighbor who always waved while watering her flowers. "It's been years." She nodded. "I know. I've wanted to talk to you for a long time." Something about her expression made me uneasy. "What is it?" She glanced around the quiet street. "It's about the night you left." We sat together on my front porch. She folded her hands tightly. "I've carried this guilt for years." Guilt." She nodded. "I saw everything." My heart skipped. "You did?" I was looking through my living room window. "I saw Margaret throw your suitcase outside. I saw you standing in the rain." I looked down. Those memories still hurt. Then Evelyn said something unexpected. "But that's not why I came." She reached into her purse. Carefully, she removed an old envelope, yellowed with age. "I found this while cleaning my attic." She handed it to me. The envelope had my name written across the front, in Daniel's handwriting. My hands began to shake. "I don't understand." Evelyn sighed. "The morning after you left, Daniel came to my house. He looked desperate. He asked if I could give this letter to you." I stared at her. "He wrote me?" She nodded. "I told him I would." Her eyes filled with tears. But later that day, Margaret came to see me. My stomach tightened. "What happened?" "She told me not to interfere. She said you had already moved away. She convinced me that giving you the letter would only make things worse." Evelyn lowered her head. I believed her. I was wrong. I found the envelope last week. It had fallen behind an old cabinet. I realized I never gave it to you. For several seconds, I couldn't breathe. 5 years. 5 years this letter had remained unopened. I looked at the envelope. The paper was worn, the ink slightly faded, but my name was still there. Sarah. I slowly opened it. Inside was a single folded page. I unfolded it carefully. Daniel's handwriting covered both sides. I began to read. "Sarah, if you're reading this, then I found the courage I should have had yesterday. I don't deserve forgiveness. I stood there while my mother threw you out. I hated myself the moment the door closed. I wanted to run after you. I even opened the front door. But I was too weak. I'm writing this because I don't want our baby to grow up believing her father didn't love her. I do. I already love her more than anything. If you'll let me, I'll spend the rest of my life trying to become the man both of you deserve. Please don't disappear before I have the chance to make this right. Daniel." My vision blurred. A tear landed on the paper. I read the letter again, then a third time. I didn't know what hurt more, reading those words, or realizing they had arrived 5 years too late that evening. I called Daniel. "Can you come over?" His voice immediately became concerned. "Is everything okay? I need to show you something." "I'll be there in 20 minutes. When Daniel arrived, I handed him the letter without saying a word. He looked confused, then recognized his own handwriting. His face went completely pale. Where did you get this?" I told him everything Evelyn had said. He sank into the chair. "I wrote this the morning after. I couldn't find you. I thought you refused to read it." I shook my head. "I never knew it existed." He stared silently at the paper, then whispered, "My mother." Before either of us could say another word, the front door opened. Emma had been upstairs finishing her homework. She looked at Daniel, then noticed the tears in his eyes. "Are you okay?" Daniel quickly wiped his face. "I'm getting there." She walked over and hugged him, without saying anything, just a quiet, 7-year-old hug. Sometimes children heal wounds adults don't even know how to describe. The next morning, Daniel drove straight to Margaret's house. She was sitting on the porch with a cup of tea. She smiled. "Good morning." He didn't smile back. He placed the old letter on the table between them. She looked at it. Her expression changed immediately. "You remember this?" She closed her eyes. "Yes. You stopped it from reaching Sarah." Silence. "I did." "Why?" Her voice trembled. "Because I thought if you saw her again, you'd choose her instead of me." Daniel stared at his mother, unable to believe what he had heard. "You were afraid of losing me?" She nodded. "I had already lost your father. I couldn't bear losing you too." "So you destroyed my marriage." Tears streamed down her face. "I told myself it was love. It wasn't. It was fear." Then Daniel stood slowly. "I've spent 5 years blaming myself. I deserve some of that blame. But you stole something from all of us." He looked toward the family photos hanging on the wall. "You stole Emma's chance to know her father. You stole Sarah's chance to choose. And you stole—" He paused. "The man I could have been." Margaret broke down completely, not because someone had yelled at her, but because, for the first time, she saw the full weight of what her fear had cost. That night, I sat on the porch watching the sunset. The letter rested beside me. I realized something. The past hadn't changed. The pain hadn't disappeared. But one mystery had finally been answered. Sometimes, closure doesn't erase heartbreak. It simply gives it a name. And with a name, healing can finally begin. For 3 days, Daniel didn't call his mother. He didn't answer her messages. He didn't visit. Not because he hated her, but because for the first time in his life, he needed to think for himself. For decades, every important decision had been influenced by Margaret. Which school to attend, which job to take, who to date, who to marry, even who to leave. He finally realized something. He wasn't just recovering from losing Sarah. He was recovering from a lifetime of never learning how to stand on his own. Margaret, meanwhile, sat alone in her small living room. The silence was overwhelming. She looked around at the family photographs decorating the walls, pictures of Daniel as a little boy, pictures of birthdays, Christmas mornings, graduation day. But there were no pictures of Emma, no pictures of Sarah. An entire branch of her family history was missing because of choices she had made. She reached for an old photo album. Inside was the picture from Daniel and Sarah's wedding. She traced Sarah's smiling face with trembling fingers. "I was wrong." She whispered the words into an empty room. "I was so terribly wrong." At Hawthorne Financial, life continued as usual. I had just finished a quarterly review meeting when Richard Bennett knocked lightly on my office door. "You have a minute?" "Of course." He sat across from me. "I've been watching Daniel." I raised an eyebrow. "And?" "He works hard. He asks questions. He never blames anyone. He reminds me of someone." I smiled. "Who?" "You." I laughed softly. "I don't think he'd appreciate that comparison." Richard smiled. "Maybe not. But hardship changes people. Sometimes for the worse. Sometimes for the better." He stood to leave. "I think he's trying." After he left, I found myself staring out the window. Trying. It wasn't the same as succeeding. but it was a beginning. That Saturday, Daniel came over to help Emma build the science volcano they hadn't finished the week before. This time, there was no awkwardness. Emma eagerly spread newspapers across the kitchen table. "I remembered the baking soda," she announced proudly. Daniel laughed, and I brought the vinegar. I watched from the doorway as the two of them carefully assembled the little volcano. Neither noticed me smiling. When they poured in the vinegar, bright red foam erupted across the table. Emma burst into laughter. "So cool." Without thinking, she grabbed Daniel's hand. "Let's do it again." He looked down at their hands. For a brief moment, emotion filled his eyes, not because of the experiment, because this was the first time his daughter had reached for him, without hesitation, without fear, without being asked. Later that afternoon, Emma and I sat together on the back porch while Daniel cleaned the kitchen. She swung her legs beneath the chair. "Mom?" "Yes, sweetheart?" She hesitated. "I've been thinking." I smiled. "I can tell." She looked down at her sneakers. "I know Daniel wasn't here before." "That's true. But," she took a deep breath, "people can change, right?" I looked at her carefully. "They can, if they really want to." She nodded. "I think he does." Another long silence. Then, she asked the question I had secretly known was coming. "Can I call him Dad?" For a moment, the world stood still. I looked at my little girl, the child I'd carried through storms, the child who had grown up asking why everyone else's fathers came to school events, the child who had never once complained, even when she had every reason to. Now, she wasn't asking because someone had told her to. She wasn't asking because Daniel expected it. She was asking because her heart was ready. I gently brushed a strand of hair behind her ear. "Sweetheart, that's your choice. No one else's." Her eyes lit up. "Really?" I smiled. Names only mean something when they're spoken honestly. "If that's what feels right to you, then yes." She wrapped her arms around me. "Thanks, Mom." That evening, Daniel packed up his things to leave. He grabbed his car keys. "I'll see you both next weekend." Emma stood quietly near the front door. She looked nervous, almost shy. Daniel noticed. "Everything okay?" She nodded. "I wanted to ask you something." He smiled gently. "Anything." She looked down at the floor, then back into his eyes. "Would it be okay if I called you Dad?" Daniel froze. For a second, he forgot how to breathe. His eyes instantly filled with tears. He slowly knelt so they were face to face. His voice barely worked. "It would be the greatest honor of my life." Emma smiled. "Okay." She stepped forward, wrapped her arms around him, and whispered, "Good night, Dad." Daniel closed his eyes. Tears rolled freely down his face. Not tears of regret, not tears of guilt, but tears of gratitude. He had missed 7 years. He could never get them back. But somehow, against all odds, his daughter had chosen to give him a chance. From the hallway, I watched quietly. Years earlier, I had imagined this moment very differently. I thought healing would feel like justice. Instead, it felt like peace. And peace was so much better. The following morning, Daniel drove to Margaret's apartment. She answered the door, looking exhausted. "I suppose you've come to tell me goodbye?" He looked at her sadly. "No, I came to tell you something." She waited. "Emma called me Dad yesterday." Margaret's eyes widened. A small smile appeared through her tears. "That's wonderful." "It is." He paused. "But Mom, there won't be any more lies. No more control. No more choosing fear over love. If you want to be part of our lives, you'll have to earn that place. Just like I had to." Margaret nodded immediately. I understand. I'll wait, no matter how long it takes. Weeks passed. Margaret never pushed. She never arrived uninvited. She never demanded forgiveness. Instead, every Saturday morning, she quietly dropped off homemade cookies at the local children's shelter. The same shelter where Sarah and baby Emma had once found safety. She never told anyone why. She simply volunteered, week after week, month after month. Sometimes, the deepest apologies aren't spoken. They're lived. One crisp autumn afternoon, Emma looked out the car window as colorful leaves drifted across the road. Mom. Yes? Do you think Grandma Margaret misses me? I glanced at her. She misses the chance she never had. Emma thought quietly, then smiled. Maybe someday she can have one. Children often forgive faster than adults, not because they forget, but because they naturally hope. As I drove home, I realized something unexpected. The story that began with betrayal was no longer about revenge. It had become a story about responsibility, about growth, about choosing kindness without forgetting the lessons of the past. But life wasn't finished surprising us, because one phone call, waiting on my voicemail that evening, would test everything our family had rebuilt. Some moments divide your life into two parts, before and after. For me, that moment came on an ordinary Wednesday afternoon. The morning had started perfectly. Emma was excited because her class was visiting the City Science Museum. She had spent an entire week talking about dinosaurs, planets, and robots. As I packed her lunch, she smiled proudly. Mom, today we're going to see a real moon rock. I laughed. I expect a full report when you get home. She saluted dramatically. Yes, ma'am. Daniel had stopped by before work just to wish her a good day. He knelt beside her. Have fun today. I will, Dad. Even after hearing it several times, the words still caught him by surprise. He smiled every single time. I love you. I love you too. She ran toward the school bus without looking back. Neither of us knew how quickly everything could change. At exactly 1:17 p.m., my phone rang. Lincoln Elementary School. My heart immediately sank. Schools don't usually call parents in the middle of the day with good news. I answered instantly. This is Sarah. The voice on the other end sounded calm, but serious. Mrs. Mitchell? Yes. This is Principal Anderson. I'm afraid Emma has been involved in an accident. The world around me disappeared. What happened? She's conscious. She's talking. But we'd like you to come to Mercy General Hospital immediately. Hospital. That was the only word my mind heard. Don't not remember grabbing my purse. I don't remember leaving my office. I don't even remember the elevator ride. I only remember driving, praying, begging. Please, let my little girl be okay. And halfway to the hospital, another phone rang. Daniel. I hesitated for only a second, then answered. Sarah? I just got a call from the school. I know. I'm on my way. I'll meet you there. No questions, no panic, just action. 20 minutes later, I ran into the emergency department. A nurse immediately recognized me. Mrs. Mitchell? Yes. This way. As we hurried down the hallway, I saw Daniel already standing outside Emma's room. His face was pale. The moment he saw me, he opened his arms. Without thinking, I hugged him. Not because he was my ex-husband, because we were two terrified parents. Nothing else mattered. The doctor entered a few moments later. I'm Dr. Collins. Emma is stable. Both of us exhaled at the same time. What happened? I asked. The doctor explained. During the museum visit, one of the students slipped near a staircase. Emma had instinctively reached out to help. Instead, both children lost their balance. Emma fell several steps. She hit her shoulder and her head. Fortunately, the museum staff reacted immediately. Scans showed no brain injury, no broken bones, just a concussion and a badly bruised shoulder. She would make a full recovery. I felt my knees weaken. Daniel caught my arm before I fell. A few minutes later, we entered her room. Emma smiled weakly. "Hi." I rushed to her bedside. "Oh, sweetheart. I'm okay, Mom." Then she looked at Daniel. "Dad, I'm sorry I scared you." Daniel gently held her hand. "You never have to apologize for getting hurt." She smiled sleepily. "The other little girl, is she okay?" The nurse smiled. "She is." Emma closed her eyes with relief. Even lying in a hospital bed, she was worried about someone else. That evening, the other child's parents arrived. The mother approached Emma's bed with tears in her eyes. "You saved my daughter." Emma looked confused. "I just tried to help." The woman hugged me. If Emma hadn't grabbed her, my daughter could have fallen all the way down those stairs. The father stepped forward. "We can never repay you." I looked at Emma. She simply shrugged. "I think anyone would have done it." But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. Emma had learned courage by watching people survive difficult things. She had learned kindness by watching someone choose compassion over revenge. Then Emma stayed overnight for observation. Daniel refused to leave. "I'll take the chair. I'll stay." I looked at him. "You've got work tomorrow." "So do you." He smiled softly. Some moments divide your life into two parts, before and after. For me, that moment came on an ordinary Wednesday afternoon.
She shook her head. "My mom says heroes don't help people because someone is watching. They help because it's the right thing to do." The reporter lowered his microphone. Sometimes the best stories don't need interviews. A week later, the school held a small assembly. Emma received a certificate for bravery. The principal invited her to say a few words. She walked to the microphone, looked out at hundreds of students, then smiled. "I was really scared." Everyone laughed softly. "But being scared doesn't mean you stop helping. It just means you're brave." Anyway, the entire auditorium stood and applauded. I looked toward Daniel. He was wiping tears from his eyes, quietly, proudly. That evening, our family celebrated with homemade pizza. Halfway through dinner, the doorbell rang. I opened it. Margaret stood there, holding a small bouquet of flowers. She looked nervous. "I heard about Emma. I just wanted to know if she's okay." Before I could answer, Emma ran into the hallway. "Grandma?" Margaret froze. She looked at me in surprise, then at Emma. Emma smiled shyly. "Mom told me who you are." And she held out her hand. "Would you like to come in?" Margaret's eyes immediately filled with tears. For years, she had dreamed of hearing those words. She stepped inside, slowly, carefully, knowing this wasn't forgiveness. It was an opportunity, and this time, she intended to earn it. As we all sat around the dinner table, laughing over slightly burned pizza, I realized something extraordinary. 5 years ago, I had believed my family had ended. In reality, it had only begun. Because family isn't defined by perfect people, it's built by imperfect people who choose every single day. To become better than they were yesterday. People often ask me if I ever regretted opening the door that Saturday morning, the door behind which stood the two people who had caused me more pain than anyone else. My answer always surprises them. No, not because what they did was acceptable. It wasn't. Not because I forgot. I never did. I opened the door because I refused to let my past decide the kind of person I would become. Another year passed. Emma turned 8. Daniel continued proving himself at work. Promotion after promotion came not because of his last name, but because of his effort. He was never the first to leave the office. He volunteered for the difficult projects. He mentored new employees, and every Friday afternoon, and no matter how busy he was, he left work exactly on time, because Emma had soccer practice. He never missed a game, not one. One rainy afternoon, Emma looked up from the field and saw him standing under an umbrella, cheering louder than any other parent. She ran over after the game. You came. Daniel laughed. I'll always come. Those 4 words healed a wound that years of apologies never could. Margaret changed too, not overnight, not perfectly. Real change never happens that way. Every Tuesday and Thursday, she volunteered at the shelter where Sarah and baby Emma had once stayed. She cooked meals, sorted donations, read books to children. She never told anyone why she was there. One afternoon, a young pregnant woman arrived at the shelter carrying 2 worn-out suitcases. The sight stopped Margaret in her tracks. It was like looking into the past. She walked over slowly. Welcome. The young woman lowered her eyes. I don't know where to start. Margaret gently took one of the suitcases. You don't have to know. We'll help you. For the first time in her life, she became the person she should have been years ago. As for me, Richard Bennett announced his retirement. The board of directors met for weeks deciding who would lead the company's operations. When the decision was finally announced, the entire executive team stood and applauded. Congratulations, Sarah. I had officially become Chief Operating Officer. The same woman who once slept in her car while 7 months pregnant now helped lead a company with hundreds of employees. During my acceptance speech, I looked around the room. I didn't get here because life was fair. I got here because difficult seasons don't last forever, and because someone believed in me when I had stopped believing in myself. I glanced toward Helen, sitting proudly in the front row, the woman who had once bought diapers for a stranger. She wiped away a tear. Some heroes never ask for recognition. That evening, we gathered in the backyard for a family barbecue. Nothing fancy, just burgers, laughter, and children running through sprinklers. Daniel was trying and failing to assemble a new grill. Emma giggled. Dad, I think you put it together backwards. I did not, she pointed. You did. 5 minutes later, he admitted she was right. Everyone laughed. Even Margaret. It was the kind of ordinary family moment I had once thought I'd never experience. As the sun began to set, Emma climbed onto the small wooden deck. She held a piece of paper in her hands. I wrote something. The adults looked at one another. She cleared her throat dramatically, then began reading. When I was little, I thought families were supposed to be perfect. But then I learned something. She looked at each of us. Families make mistakes, sometimes really big mistakes. She looked toward Daniel. Sometimes people leave. Then she looked toward Margaret. Sometimes people hurt each other. Finally, she looked at me. But my mom taught me something important. She said forgiveness doesn't mean pretending nothing happened. It means refusing to let the bad things stop the good things from growing. The backyard became completely silent. Emma smiled. I think our family is like my science volcano. Everyone laughed. It broke. And then we built it again. Daniel quietly covered his face. Margaret cried openly. Even Richard Bennett chuckled from his chair. Children have a way of explaining life better than adults ever can. A few weeks later, Daniel knocked on my office door. Got a minute? Always. He stepped inside holding a small box. I found this while cleaning out the attic. Inside was my old wedding ring, the one I'd left behind years ago. He placed it gently on my desk. I think this belongs to your past. I looked at it for a long moment, then smiled. No, it belongs to yours. He looked confused. I don't need it anymore. I've already kept the only things worth keeping. He smiled. Emma. I nodded. And peace. Without another word, he closed the box. Sometimes closure isn't dramatic. Sometimes, it's simply knowing you no longer need to carry. Yesterday, several months later, the local community center held its annual fundraising gala. Helen was receiving an award for decades of volunteer service. The director invited people whose lives had been changed by her kindness to speak. I walked onto the stage. The audience applauded politely. I looked toward Helen. You probably don't remember the day we met. She laughed softly. I do. You bought diapers for a stranger. You told her to help someone else when she could. I paused. My name is Sarah, and because you believed in me, I had the chance to become the woman standing here today. The audience stood. Helen cried. I walked down from the stage and hugged the woman who had unknowingly changed my daughter's future. That night, as everyone gathered outside beneath strings of warm lights, a little girl tugged on my sleeve. Emma. Mom? Yes? Can I ask one last question? I smiled. Always. She looked up at the stars. If Grandma hadn't made that terrible mistake, would our life have been different? I thought carefully before answering. Yes. Very different. Better? I looked at Daniel laughing with children across the lawn. I looked at Margaret serving food to shelter volunteers. I looked at Helen smiling beside her award. Then I looked back at Emma. I don't know if it would have been better, but I know this. The hardest chapters of our lives don't always become the end of the story. Sometimes, they become the reason we discover who we really are. Emma smiled. I like our story. I wrapped my arm around her shoulders. So do I as we walk toward our family. The narrator's voice would say, some people will break your heart. Others will help you rebuild it. But the greatest victory isn't revenge. It's creating a life so full of love, purpose, and peace that the people who once doubted you become only a chapter, not the whole book. The camera would slowly pull back. The family stood together beneath the evening sky, not perfect, not unchanged, but stronger, because they had chosen growth over bitterness, responsibility over excuses, and love over pride. If this story touched your heart, remember, forgiveness doesn't erase the past, and justice doesn't always look like revenge. Sometimes the greatest success is building a beautiful life after someone else tried to take it away.